So Doomsday Theories, huh?
Doomsday Theories. It's crazy because this is going to be our first two-parter episode. We're going to be talking about, I don't know if we want to call it a top 10 or 10 best doomsday scenarios or theories, but it's kind of convenient. So I get married in less than a week. So naturally, we're going to talk about doomsday scenarios, you know?
Yeah, no, I think honestly either or. I mean, when you think about top 10, I mean it's like keep in mind anyone who's listening, we compiled a list of what we think could be a potential of what is to come in our future, or what could or could not happen. It doesn't necessarily mean that these are in any specific order, like, oh, this is the most likely one to happen, but these are just our top 10. We have them in a, for the most part, completely random order, and so yeah.
Or we're fortune tellers and we know exactly what's going to happen when it happens. So you should heed our warnings because everything we're about to talk about will happen within the next 10 years.
Max, yeah, the guy who wrote The Simpsons, yeah, he wasn't that guy. It was actually us. We actually existed a long time in the future, so we already knew what was going on. So,
speaking of that, it is kind of interesting because I don't know if you had this thought, but when I was going through making notes of like the 5 I'll be talking about, we've kind of talked about some of these topics or scenarios, whether it be very in-depth or just kind of in passing in some of the prior episodes. Like, did you notice that at all? Like, we've kind of talked about some of these before, but it'll be interesting because we'll be looking at it from a much more sinister, pessimistic perspective. I think maybe that's the right way to look at it. But I can kick it off here. So my first one that I had for this one is a mega flood, or you could call it a biblical flood. First of all, I know I was the one that put this on our sheet of like top 10, but are you even remotely concerned, like in your own life, with the potential of like a biblical mega flood even happening? Is that even on your radar as things to worry about?
So it's funny that you say that because, like, if you want to get biblical about it, the Bible actually states that the first time the earth is actually destroyed, God will destroy the earth the first time by water and the second time by fire. So realistically, biblically, I don't think it'll be a flood. Now, we actually talked about this a couple episodes ago, talking about Antarctica and how, if a lot of that was to melt off and climate change and stuff like that, like realistically, the water levels could rise. And I don't know if you actually saw, was it like, I think it was a week ago, 2 weeks ago during the eclipse, that there was a huge wave that came off of Antarctica because they were thinking that it was like an iceberg or something that came from under it or something. But essentially this huge wave worked its way all the way up. I think it was the Pacific, the one that's in the middle in between the two, between Africa and...
Oh, are you talking about the Atlantic Ocean?
Yeah. Is it okay? So yeah, it went all the way up to the Atlantic and went all the way around Africa and up, and then it went away. But I think they said it was like 60-foot waves or something like that. Like,
was that dark blob I kept seeing people talk about, like on TikTok and whatnot? Like they had the radar, the sonar of it or whatever. Yeah. Okay, I didn't know what that was. I didn't really pay too much attention to it, to be honest with you.
I didn't either until someone told me so.
Yeah. So one thing to stick with, like the unscripted aspect of the title of this podcast, you brought up a good point about, I do remember this, how the Old Testament does reference how, the promise that, and correct me if I'm wrong, because you're probably more up to speed on this than I am at this point, God did make a promise to Noah that after the earth was flooded, that he would not do it again via the rainbow. I think that was like the way that the promise was conveyed. But then if it were to happen again, it would be by fire. One thing, I don't know why I never made this connection before, but there is like a layer of ash across the North American continent. And so I forget how far back it is. I think it's like 11,000 years ago. If you look at the soil samples across North America, you can tell there was a massive fire at one point in time. Could be totally unrelated to this whole concept, but it made me think about that. I never really made that connection before because we do know at one point in time there was a large flood, TBD on if it was global or not. But I mean, every religion has their like biblical flood type story. So we know something at some point in time happened. Now, was it the whole globe? Was it parts of the globe where just people lived? Who knows? TBD on that. But I think it could happen again. And I think it could happen through a multitude of ways. I mean, the easiest one that I'm sure the vast majority of the internet will point to is like the idea of global warming, climate change, whatever title you want to slap on it. But it could be much more drastic situation, which I know you have on your list, talking about an asteroid impact. And so, not to steal some of that thunder, but like, what if a giant asteroid lands in the middle of the ocean? That's going to displace a lot of water, right? And I know we've talked about this, and I think it was the Antarctica or Atlantis episode, but just think about all the major cities that are on the coastlines, right?
Yeah.
And if the ocean levels were to rise by even, I think it's like 3 feet, you lose New York, Houston, Miami, Los Angeles, San Francisco, like all these cities that, and that's just in the US, like globally, probably lose London. I mean, any city that's by the coastline.
Yeah. Well, I definitely think that throughout the portion of this, because keep in mind, again, anyone who's listening, it's going to be a two-parter, so you're not going to know everything that we're talking about for this episode, for the next episode, but there are definitely probably some things that could be connected as to far as how some of these events could play out, like, and again, we're just talking about it, like we're just speculating it, but I definitely think an asteroid impact could be a cause of a flood. Now, you have to think, though, there are other ways a flood could happen. So if you know that the moon actually controls the tides and controls how the water actually fluctuates, like when they say, like, oh, it's high noon, so the tide's coming in kind of thing, different things like that. So there could be something astronomical there that could cause that to happen. Again, at this point in time, we don't know if that's going to be the case. Now, again, we have seen times where, tsunamis. I mean, what was that earthquake that hit?
Which one, dude? There were so many within the last month or so.
Dude, that, man, we can talk about that. But the one, I think it was like 2015, it was like the one that hit Haiti or Japan, and it had that huge tsunami that just came through and hit.
Yeah, I think that one was Japan, but also, I mean, Haiti got rocked in, I mean, what was that, 2008, 2009?
Yeah.
2007. Anyways.
But there's definitely a number of, geological aspects that could cause, flooding or tsunami. Now, as far as like a great flood, it would take, obviously biblical stars to align on that for that to happen again. I personally feel, just because our planet would have to be so like messed up in that sense for there to be something that astronomical to happen to flood, like, the entire, like, have you seen that? Okay, for example, have you seen the movie The Day After Tomorrow?
Yes.
Take that for example. So the entire northern hemisphere pretty much just froze over.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's like something like that would have to happen. So let's just say the entire Arctic would have to just melt off for a flood of that proportion to take out, the entire, probably northern hemisphere, if not more. But again, it just all depends.
What if we accidentally hit the moon with a missile? Or what if the moon gets hit by an asteroid or meteor and gets knocked off its rotational pull?
Correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't the moon okay, so and this is just me being, because I can't remember this for the life of me, wasn't the moon a part of the Earth at one point?
We don't technically know. We have a lot of good guesses. So, like, there's one theory, it's like the dual or the two Earth theory, where you had two Earths basically.
Yeah.
They kind of collided into each other. One absorbed the majority, and then the rest was like the moon that kind of broke out. You also have a theory that the moon was like an asteroid that hit the Earth and chunks of it went off into our like gravitational pull, and then over time they kind of, I don't know, morphed into one giant mass. There's so many theories out there, but the moon is another fun mystery that we could probably talk about in depth another time. But
oh, dude, don't even get me started.
What the heck is on the dark side of the moon? Have you ever thought about that?
No, don't even get me stuck. I have like some fun theories, but man, we'll have to talk about that another time. But I I think that if there would be a great flood, I think it would again, I think it would have to be something of biblical proportions. Like those stars would have to align for that to happen, or something. It would have to be major geological like aspects to happen. It could be a number of things that could cause it, but
Well, we have the Old Testament. We have the New Testament. Why not have the New Testament? Everyone loves the third movie in a franchise, right? A nice trilogy.
right.
We're due for that third collection. I don't know what's going to cause that, but hey, you know.
I mean, technically, if you actually and keep in mind, I'm a novice when it comes to biblical studies. Definitely trying to earn my what's the first belt that you get? Your white belt. Like,
Yeah, I think the white belt that's the default.
yeah, so it's like technically still trying to get my belts in order with that. But if you actually read through some of the New Testament and you actually you learn how to actually study it and apply it to your life, realistically, we are living out the New Testament currently. And once you get to like those later books, you'll actually start seeing like, they're talking about what we need to be doing today as to how they did back then, so that we know what's going to happen and what's going to come. Now, again, you have to really understand all that. And again, I'm still learning, I'm still understanding, trying to get my knowledge base there. But as far as having a New Testament, it would take some very much so deep rooted people who really understand the Bible to try to do something like that. But again, trying to get those people to do that would be the difficult part, because obviously it's not made to have that trilogy. It's made as to what it's made as. So
Worst case scenario, though, we build an ark, we'll sell tickets. Maybe it'll be like a Carnival Cruise Line or something. Who knows?
Funny enough, they've actually got a life-size Ark museum, I think, in Washington, D.C.
I think, no, I know. It's was it the Creation Museum?
Something like that. They have a museum in Dallas that talks about that stuff, but this is like a life-size Ark that I'm like, dude, I actually wouldn't mind going to check it out just to experience that, just to see it proportion size, how big it actually is. But that would be pretty cool. So
what's crazy if you think about how many big boats we have these days too. Think about just every cruise line that's just out there.
Yeah.
Like there's like hundreds, if not thousands of those boats that theoretically could be available. Even if you didn't know how to captain it, it could still kind of just sit there and float. I don't know how difficult it is to topple one of those things in a big wave, but I don't know. You can sell tickets to it, end of the world type party.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like, we're going to go out. We're just going to be on a boat party. And I guess,
Yeah. The one thing, though, a boat would not be able to help with, though, is if the Yellowstone Caldera volcano decided to go boom.
Well, funny enough, that is actually number 9 on our list. And so it's like, I have talked with many people about this. I think in the recent years, there's been like minor activity, but when you look at Yellowstone, it's actually the largest volcano, like active volcano on our planet. Like, you think like other volcanoes that have erupted in the past have been bad. If this volcano actually were to erupt, that would be the end of humanity. Like, I'm throwing that out there for anyone who is listening, for anyone who understands it. If you want to know proportion size, the size of Caldera is 45 miles by 30 miles. So it's an area about 1,500 square miles. So think about that for a second. It actually, I think it covers the entire state, almost the entire state of Montana, and it goes into what's the state that's south of Montana? Is it Idaho?
Wyoming?
Or okay, it's Wyoming.
Yeah.
I can't remember which one it was, but it covers a couple of states. Let's just put it like that. Here's the thing. They've been talking for years that Caldera is due to erupt at any moment. Now, when you kind of go into biblical stuff again, and it says like, God will destroy the earth by fire, or he will, instead of it being by a flood. Honestly, that's probably the first thing that comes to mind would be Caldera, because realistically, if that volcano erupts, like, we're done for. Like, people think that, across seas, they think they're going to be okay. Like, I don't think you realize, like, that that volcano, if it goes off, it's going to destroy the entire northern hemisphere, not northern hemisphere, the entire North American continent, and then probably a portion of the Central American continents, if not more. And that's just because it spans, yeah, okay, so it's actually right here, Wyoming, Montana, and Idaho. So I was right. It was Idaho. But it's not only, obviously a volcano, but it's got geysers. Obviously, if you've been to Yellowstone National Park, there's definitely a possibility that this could be, how the world ends. But at this point in time, nobody knows, because it's literally just a ticking time bomb as to, like, if it's going to or not.
Well, the part that's wild, I don't think a lot of people think about too, is let's pretend, if, those listening, if you're in Europe right now, you're like, volcano goes off, North America, we lose it. Oh, well. But it's even worse than that, because the amount of ash and soot and just debris that would be thrown up into the atmosphere, it would basically cause what we would consider to be a nuclear winter at that point, without a nuclear bomb going off, just because the amount of stuff that'd be thrown up into the atmosphere, blocking sunlight. I mean, the temperature across the earth would plummet. Agriculture would be kind of dead in the water at that point. Some of the water sources could be ruined too, just because of things that are in the atmosphere that are dropping back down into our freshwater sources. I mean, it's just going to cause a lot of disruption. I think from everything I remember reading, is like, it's almost just as bad as a nuclear war to an extent. Now, a nuclear war, yes, they can be escalated up to its amount of one volcano, but the size of this volcano, I mean, it'd take out a continent, plus impact all the other continents through the atmospheric pollution. And you wouldn't get out of that for decades, if not 100+ years, from how I understand it.
Yeah.
It is wild, though, because I feel like anytime someone records, it's like the buffalo or like wildlife that are running out of the Yellowstone National Park, like running away from the park, there's always that little bit of panic of, what are the animals detecting that we don't understand is happening yet? And I know this had a couple of scares like that. I remember I looked up once. I didn't look it up because I knew I didn't have to, like, quote unquote, be the expert on this one, but I don't know if there's actually a theory as to, like, when we think it could happen. Because correct me if I'm wrong, I think it has happened before, but it was like hundreds of thousands, if not a million years ago.
Yeah, so it actually, its last forming eruption was 640,000 years ago, which is exactly why it looks the way it does currently now. Now, thankfully, this is one of the few volcanoes. So actually, I don't know if you know this about volcanoes. I actually came across a reel, and I didn't know this because, thanks to the comments, I thought, it was what it was, but people in the comments actually came through. When people go, when you have scientists that go to volcanoes, and let's just say it's an active volcano, they will actually, like, toss, like, rocks, like large rocks, into the volcano to actually break that crust so that it can relieve that pressure.
Oh.
Because if the pressure builds up too much, then that's what causes the eruption. And so they toss this little tiny rock down, and I could actually probably pull up a video here in a second, but they throw a rock down off into there, and then it just has a little small hole, and then all of a sudden you start seeing the lava come up, and it creates this big crater in the middle of it where the lava is just like...
Yeah, they're trying to relieve pressure before it really mounts and has its big pop moment, like a Mount St. Helena or something like that.
Okay, let's see here. I'm going to do this real quick.
I know people get spooked too because they see these volcanoes around the world. I think I have to watch the stream. Let me see here. See what's going on here. Eruption after person throws stone. Volcanic rubbish. Oh, wow. They really just like...
Yeah, they just yeet it.
Okay.
And you see it.
Oh,
And
wow. Okay. So it's a very thin layer then.
Yeah, no, it's not thick at all, and depending on the size of the rock. But as you can see, though, I mean, they toss it down there, and it's just...
Yeah, for those listening, so picture, like the opening of a volcano, but you don't see any of the actual lava or fire and brimstone yet. It's almost like there's like a thin layer of like crispy crust, and someone tossed a big boulder or like a large rock down there. It kind of poked a hole in it. It's almost, I'm trying to think, like busting into an apple pie for the first time. It's probably a terrible analogy.
Oh, no, that's a good analogy. Hey, I love my apple pie. Right.
Yeah. Interesting. That makes sense. It's like a proactive way to prevent death and destruction.
Yeah, and so, but the thing is, though, is with Yellowstone, to my knowledge, they don't do that. I feel like that's kind of one of those things where they're just like, we're not going to play with too much fire. I could be wrong. But Yellowstone, if I'm not mistaken, is one of the few volcanoes that actually has like the, obviously the national park where it has the geysers and all that kind of stuff. Those geysers, I think, are a form of the relieving the pressure.
Yes.
Now, and correct me if I'm wrong for anyone who's listening, but I'm pretty sure like a few years ago, if not longer, I think this was before COVID, they actually detected activity within Caldera, but it was also too because the geysers weren't actively going off. I could be wrong on that, but I remember seeing something about that because there was like a huge talk about, oh, it's going to erupt. Like, this is it. Like, this is like their, I could be right. It might have been near an election year. And they're like, oh, this is it. This is the end of the world. I'm like, cool. Like, great.
I'm a professional volcanologist, and I believe everything you're saying right now is correct. It does sound familiar, though. I do remember.
Yeah. But I think as far as, and again, these are in no specific order, but I think that this could be something that could happen that could lead obviously to the destruction of our planet, because I don't think when it comes to volcanoes, I mean, yeah, there are volcanoes that erupt, but when you have a volcano of this magnitude that could do what it does, it's not going to just affect a small region. Like, it's going to, like you said, it's going to affect everything, the ecosystem. It's going to affect so much to the point where we're not even going to have a continent. Like, North America is going to be gone, and we're going to be just, where there's nowhere for us to go, like, at all.
Now, let me ask you this. If this thing were to pop in our lifetime, would you rather be living in that northwestern region of the country, or would you rather be somewhere else, in the sense that you'd be instantly gone versus having to deal with the aftermath of whatever the heck that death and destruction looks like?
Take me out, because I'm going to see Jesus. Like, that's all I'm saying. Like, I don't think anyone could functionally live in our world, like on our world, when that happens. Now, here, and when you look at it from an ecosystem standpoint, very little bit of what the world has, America produces. And I'm not saying that to be like, oh, like, we don't produce anything, we're lazy. No, because like we do, but a lot of what we produce is like farm crops, things like that. Like, you take us out compared to a lot of other countries that don't really do crops and farming and stuff like that, like we do. It kind of takes out a lot of the aspect of that. And so I personally would not want to deal with that aftermath, because I feel like the aftermath is going to be so much worse than just like, you know what, it is what it is. Like, because you have to think, if that thing erupts, I don't care if we live in Texas or not, you give it like not even 30 minutes, like probably within like 15 to 20 minutes, and we're going to feel the ripples of what just happened, and it's going to be hitting us pretty quick.
Yeah, no, I remember seeing a map once, and there's very few places that are even safe in the United States, or even the North American continent, from the initial blast. Like, if I remember correctly, I can see you're Googling right now, I think it's like just South Florida, like South Florida, and then maybe South Texas. Like, maybe once you get down, like, south of Corpus Christi, like way down there, everything else, you're kind of in the blast radius. And even if you're not in the blast radius, like, you're going to feel it, and it's going to get dark real quick. Here,
I don't know how. Here's the thing. They have this map set up like this, but realistically, it's going to affect so much more, because the atmosphere moves so quick that whatever gets shot up into the air. And I don't know if like a lot of volcanoes are connected, obviously underground, like if there's like just multiple chains of just.
That's a good point. That's a good point.
What if this eruption sets off the chain? Because I don't even know how many volcanoes are actually in our country, or just not even in our country, but just in the world. I want to say there's probably like a few hundred, if I'm not mistaken.
I think there's thousands. If you're talking about the world, thousands, if not tens of thousands. I think in the United States, there's definitely a lot. There's a lot of dormant ones, but yeah, because you got the Ring of Fire, That's the ring of fire going around there. That's like thousands, I think.
So think about how many volcanoes would be affected probably in this region right here.
Yeah.
Just with caldera erupting. Like, if you take just that little bit right there, and probably what could be affected will obviously span over to here as well. Now, and that's just my question, because it's like, is everything connected, or, you know, is it just gonna be that one volcano and then we're good? Either way, there's it's gonna be destruction. Like, if that volcano was to go off, I don't think people should take that lightly, because it can be it's a catastrophic event if it were to happen.
That's a good point, though. It makes me wonder if, like, the earthquakes that would be caused in that process, if that could cause a chain reaction, like you mentioned, of other, whether they be active or inactive volcanoes elsewhere. Like, I know Texas has some volcanoes, but they're inactive or dormant, and they've been dormant for like millions of years. I know there's one in Austin called Pilot Knob. I think it's been dormant rather than inactive. I think it's a dormant one, but
yeah,
it makes you wonder. Long story short, this is basically the largest pimple on planet Earth, and it's bound to pop at some point. It's just a win, and it's like, I don't know, it's probably not our lifetime, but it could be.
Right.
Could be.
Nah, yeah.
Do you have any other thoughts on that one, or?
No, I mean, I think that was just a good, like, that's probably one of the more realistic scenarios that we're going to be talking about during this. But yeah, again, we live in 2024 where we never know what could happen, you know? So.
No, you're spot on. So for the next one I got to put on the glasses. It's got to be.
Oh, so we're going conspiracy theory on this one. All right, we got to get ready for the conspiracy theory. This is our conspiracy theory get up, y'all. Like, you know, when we get into it, into it.
It's almost like you get in Unabomber mode. All right, so the next one that I had, at least for me on my list, is, and this is the way I put it, the way I wrote it down. It's an alien/angelic invasion. Now, this is what I mean by that. And maybe invasion is the wrong word to use, but it's been interesting. When you think of aliens, just like the term aliens and whatever you perceive in your head as aliens, the story that exists, the narrative that is commonplace, is that they are Martians, for lack of a better term, which Martians means that they're from Mars, right? So the idea is that aliens are not of this planet. They come from space, wherever that is. They've come here. They're not of this Earth. There's an interesting theory, and maybe it's not a theory because some people say this is the fact, that what we're perceiving as aliens is really more of a spiritual entity. Now, that's not to say it's related to anything Judeo-Christian or Hindu or really any of the world religions that we come to know, but it's that they exist here and they've been here longer than we have. And it's almost like we're existing within their world. Now, are they within the same universe or light spectrum or existence that we're in? That's a good question. I don't know. This is a rabbit hole I've actually been going down recently, because there's a lot of, how do I describe it? Well-educated people that are entertaining the idea that these entities really are more spiritual than they are green men from off planet. And so it's interesting because we know, at least from the U.S. perspective, the United States, that our military does know they exist. I know we've talked about it in the UFO alien episode conversation we had. We had the Tic Tac video. We see them off the East Coast, the West Coast. We've seen them in other countries as well. But because of the amount of surveillance technology we have out there, whether that be radar on planes or ships, or just the amount of cameras we have out there, we are seeing more and more of it. Now, is that because we have more surveillance out there, or is it because they really are making their presence known more and more? Now, if you want to get real slippery with this, there also is a theory that the powers that be have made an arrangement with them, and that arrangement's been eroded over the years, so it's getting very sketchy. But that's something I'll throw out there. I'm just going to serve that dish up to you and just see what your initial thoughts are. Do you even think there's anything of relevance there? Do you think, like, they're like not from here?
So I actually kind of like the idea that you mentioned at the beginning of that one, where they're not living on the same plane as we are. If that, like, like what we perceive and what we can see, they're actually living here also, but they just live on a different spectrum than what we're able to perceive and obviously sense. So it's like they have their own civilizations built and they're doing their own thing at the same time we're doing our own thing. We just can't see them, and they can see us. So like, what if the alien invasion is we're actually the aliens and this was their planet the whole time? Again, y'all, we're gonna get deep on some of these. But as far as the making the deal, and like, with obviously with the powers that be, and then now this just becoming less and less abundant. I don't want to say abundant actually, but like they're just the lack of the deal is just kind of just there now. Like, they don't really care. They're just like, hey, we're here, we're gonna make ourselves known, we're gonna do our thing. I could see that being a thing, but at the same time, I don't believe the idea that aliens are those green people. I don't believe that. I don't think that they are. I mean, there might be some, but it's like when I picture like different life forms, and I could be way off base because, again, no one's going to convince me that aliens somewhere out there don't exist. That's just the way it is.
It's not fun to be on base anyway, so get way off base.
Yeah, it's not. When I picture aliens, there's two types of aliens that I picture. And that is, if you've ever seen the movie Independence Day, where the aliens are just like, they're here to just destroy. They don't care. They want to take over each planet or destroy the planet and get its resources and then move on to the next one. Or we're like a Guardians of the Galaxy style, where you see all the cool looking aliens and all the different species and things like that, and you're just having a good time, So it's like, realistically, what if the aliens that have been here with us are just like, hey, we just want to have a good time. Like, like, we're not here to cause any trouble. We're not here to do anything. We just want to have a good time. But then you have movies like, I can't remember what the name of this movie is though, but this guy gets abducted by aliens and they actually like have him strapped to a table, and they're running all kinds of tests on him, sticking like tubes down his throat, all this other kind of like, I'd never watched the full movie, but then you got those aliens that are just here to abduct people and run tests on them versus like, hey, why don't you just come down here and just communicate with us and we'll tell you everything that there is to know about us. You don't have to run tests on us to find everything out, because realistically, if you wanted to kill us, you probably could. So those are probably three variations of aliens actually. That would probably be out there.
Have you ever wondered if we're the science project?
As far as like to them?
Yeah.
Now,
they're observing us the same way you would observe an ant farm.
Now, okay, so, man, now you got me like wanting to have a part 2 episode of this. So, Men in Black. At the very end of the first Men in Black, when you see that it zooms out of the planet into the galaxy and you see the aliens just playing with the marbles.
It's just a game of marbles.
We're just a game of marbles to these aliens, and that's all we are. Now, there's a theory I think that we talked about. I could be wrong, and if I am, then we could definitely go more in depth on this in another alien type episode. But what if our government actually are, in bed with the aliens, and they're just allowing the aliens to just do whatever they want to do and just study us, all this other kind of stuff, and a way to save their own skin in case something was to happen. They're like, hey, we gave you all these people here, like, let us live kind of thing. But again, at the same time, like, I mean, very well we could be a science experiment to them. Like, they could be studying us. They could be watching everything we do. But at the same time, if their technology, as it would seem, because they can travel from planet to planet with ease, why do you have to study us? Because realistically, if whatever your ulterior motive is, whether it be destruction or peace and prosperity, you have technology that we don't have. So even if you wanted to do either one, what can we do to stop you?
You can make the same argument potentially for the way we study monkeys in the jungle.
Yeah. Very true.
Have you ever heard the stories of when night vision goggles were first issued during the Vietnam War and how those soldiers were seeing demonic presences? Because back then, night vision goggles actually had like a red vision spectra rather than green. I'll need to look up the details on it, but it's like they were seeing things, and it's interesting because I think it's tracked back to the red light of the technology rather than being green. Because back then, the whole vision spectrum you would see would be from red rather than green, which is the modern day version of it. But there's countless stories of soldiers in Vietnam seeing like demonic or presences that were not known to them at the time. It's also interesting because there's a lot of weird stories of any time there's like a large conflict zone, or you could say war, for lack of a better term, that there's always things that are being seen that you typically wouldn't see outside of a conflict zone like that.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So going back to the actual main point of it, who's not to say that at some point this will all come to like some, I don't know, crescendo or some climactic moment of something actually happening? Because there's some people out there that will say the whole like UFO alien phenomenon that we kind of talked about in that episode, that's almost the psyop. Like that's the lie, because the truth is that much more wild and dark and sinister.
I don't think people are ready for that truth, but we could definitely do a part 2 episode on that. And whether or not they're ready or not, the truth is coming, y'all.
I'll leave this one with this. What's in the basement of the Vatican? Your eyes got real wide right there. What is in the basement of the Vatican that we're just not able to learn about? What do they know that we don't?
They know something, because obviously we don't, and they're very secretive people over there. So,
have you actually ever seen the thing where it's, and I can pull up photographs later, but the theory that a lot of the rooms in the Vatican are designed after like serpent creatures? Have you ever seen that? Yeah, that was always very interesting. That could definitely just be a fun coincidence.
Yeah.
Or it could be related to what I just mentioned. So,
facts.
Who knows? But on a lighter term, not really. I know your next topic's kind of a one that's to die for.
I've been waiting for this one. A zombie apocalypse. So this is gonna sound bad, but if I had to choose an apocalypse or something to happen next to Jesus coming back, it would be a zombie apocalypse. Obviously.
So you think it's very plausible that it could happen?
So I think that based on the previous years of what's happened in our world, I think something along those lines could happen. Again, I know COVID is a very different thing. I mean, it's really not. It was just a bad flu. Really.
It all depends on what the side effects are, you know? It can spread just as easily.
I mean, if you mean the side effects of the vaccine, then we can do another episode about that all on its own.
Is it the mark of the beast? I don't know. Anyways, continue.
So
I love how you squirmed there for a second. For those of you just listening,
I think it's something that could happen, and I say that because, again, when you look at COVID, people are like, "Oh, like we don't know how this happened." Like, okay, I won't be honest with y'all. We're gonna keep the conspiracy theory going. China invented COVID in a laboratory and released it on the world. I don't think it was.
I don't even think China invented it. I think it was funded by, like, what was it? The U.S. Department of. Anyways, sorry. Continue your thought. I didn't mean.
No, you're good. Okay, so it wasn't created by China, but it didn't stop China and all of them from running the tests and the experiments on it, and then somehow it got out. I don't believe for a second that it was a chicken virus or like, all the meat markets that are over across seas that just, all the cross contamination. I don't believe for 1 second that it was that. And I don't want to get, because again, I don't want to go that far into that on this episode, but I think that because they have the ability to mess around with strands of viruses on a whim, and I get it, like sometimes you want to do that because you obviously want to have vaccines for stuff. Now, I'm just going to go out on a limb here and just straight up say that I'm not going to be like, oh, I don't believe in vaccines. I don't believe in some vaccines. Just going to say that. I don't think the COVID vaccine helped anybody at all. I don't think the flu vaccine is a necessary vaccine to get. Now, there are some vaccines, like your standard vaccines that you have to get growing up, your hepatitis, your meningitis, cool. Things like that, I get it, And so at the end of the day, the fact that our government and our scientists and our pharmaceutical companies that pretty much run the entire world, let's be honest here, have the ability to just play around with these viruses all they want, all the live long day, and sometimes not knowing what they're getting themselves into and at the possibility of something happening just like COVID happened. Now, do I see it happening in some way like that? Let's be honest here. There's a ton of zombie movies out there. There's a ton that go into like how everything starts, how everything happens. Some of them, like, okay, one of the more prominent ones, Resident Evil series, it starts because of a virus in a pharmaceutical company.
That was a good documentary.
And it was, really?
No, I'm just kidding. No, I was joking.
I was like, what they actually...
No, yeah, the Umbrella Corporation, which could be very similar. I looked it up. It's the National Institutes of Health, NIH, which, i.e., through Dr. Fauci, funded gain-of-function research, which gain-of-function is what you talked about with you're purposely manipulating viruses to...
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Don't get me started on Dr. Fauci. Again, if we do a whole separate episode on this type of stuff, then he will definitely be a talking point.
Yeah.
But when you have movies like Resident Evil, obviously that portray a virus breaking out in a laboratory, and then somehow, some way, they couldn't keep that contained miles underground and it got out, that, I don't have faith in our own government to be able to do that, because let's be honest here, a virus already happened and it got out and it affected the entire world. Obviously a lot of speculation that it was population control, be that as it may. But then you have your zombie movies that are like Zombieland, where it's like someone ate a contaminated burger and there you go. Like they had started the whole thing. Now, as far as like how it could affect the world, it all depends on how quick, our government acts on it. Now, again, if any of the movies have taught us anything, it's that you can't depend on the government when you're in a crisis situation like that, because they can try to contain it all they want, but it will not be contained. Everything that you think is going to happen probably will happen. Take The Walking Dead, for example. I mean, like, they tried to contain it. Didn't work. CDC tried to contain it. Didn't work. There's so much there that could definitely happen. Now, as far as what it would do to the world, I mean, let's be honest. I mean, again, if you've seen any movie, then it shows you that, I'm not saying we can't rebuild, but the world as we would know it would be dead. Like it'd be gone. Like we would have, like, electricity would be gone. I mean, unless somehow, some way solar panels, things like that, but everything would just be different.
Yeah, because even then, think about it. If the grid were to go down, even if you use the whole solar panel analogy, they'll still have to power batteries or power something somewhere. Like, they have a finite lifespan, and once they're gone, like, they're gone. I think people don't realize sometimes how fragile this society is that we've built up, in this economy, and how quickly it can crumble. I mean, we saw it in 2020 and 2021 when international trade kind of grinded to a halt, and you had scenarios where the port of Los Angeles wasn't able to process its deliveries quick enough or even receive the deliveries quick enough. And then you had scenarios too where people were looting the trains that were moving product from the port of Los Angeles to the rest of the country, just recently, within the last month of recording this episode, we had the Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore, which is a very pivotal bridge, where a lot of the like waste and hazardous materials like oil, natural gas, things like that are being transported in and out of the eastern coast, that's quasi offline and it just causes huge disruption. So if a very subtle thing such as like, you know, a legitimate virus, something that were to really take people out of commission or just having to like, it's so crazy to think about, like in 2020, like there was a brief moment where like the vast majority of the world really did kind of pause for a moment. But imagine if you would have paused for, you know, 5 years, like the majority of the world probably paused for like what, a year, maybe like a year solid. It got kind of gray after like 3/4 of that first year where people were like, okay, like we got to get back to work kind of a thing.
Yeah. Like there was nothing that you could do to really stop that.
Yeah. Now pause for 2 whole years. Like what is, things start to crumble at that point. And it's, when some of those things collapse, like you can't just flip the switch and turn it back on. Like this is a machine that it's got to keep turning. And once you stop it, it's stopped probably for more than a couple of generations because people forget how to do things. I like to talk about the electric grid because that's such a simple one that could go offline at any point for various reasons. Like whenever in February of, was it 2021 when the Texas power grid almost went offline because of the giant freeze that we had across the entire state? I remember the Dallas Morning News did a big investigative like write-up on that, and they had mentioned, I forget the exact number, we were like literal minutes away, like just literal minutes from the entire thing going offline. And I don't think people realize that if it were to go offline, not even just the Texas power grid, just segments of power grids anywhere in the world, it takes decades for them to be powered back up because some of that, like you have to rebuild it from scratch. You can't just go on and like flip the switch. It's like you got to rebuild generators, the power lines, like things that are interlocked and connected across the area.
Yeah. And here's the thing. So like when I talk about zombie apocalypse, I don't necessarily mean just, you know, like you're going to have your flesh eating stuff like that. There's another one that I didn't mention just yet, but it just came to mind when you were talking about a couple things. Have you seen the show and played the game, The Last of Us?
I've played the game. I'm aware that the show was good, but
watch the show. It's good, but I've actually heard talk. This has actually been a more abundant topic that I could have just been because I wasn't thinking about it, but talking about a fungal infection because cordyceps actually, when you see like the zombified bugs and the ants and all this other kind of stuff, cordyceps is the fungus that causes that kills its host and then turns it into a zombie and then finds its way back to its colony or whatever the case and then infects everything else. That I could see next to like a virus potentially being the cause of something like this. I could see nature doing what nature does best. But the thing is I think our bodies are immune to it though because our bodies are at a certain temperature that it just can't thrive at. But again, being entertainment versus reality and it being a show, it kind of shows a perspective of like this could happen because like nature's always evolving. Nature always has to evolve because of people. And so I could see that being another possibility as well.
That is a terrifying one. I think, was it The Happening? This was like a Mark Wahlberg. No, it was not Mark Wahlberg. Who produced that one?
I don't know who produced it, but I know Mark Wahlberg did it.
What's his name? He was in that movie. Oh my gosh, I'm going blank on his name now, and he is a big actor. What is his name?
M. Night Shyamalan.
No, was that M. Night Shyamalan that did that?
Yeah, he was the director.
Oh, okay. Well, that's not who I was thinking, but still, my description stands true. Big name in the movie industry. But yeah, I mean, is it predictive programming? Who knows? We'll find out. But yeah, that is a terrifying one that it's only a matter of time before that makes a jump over to humans or even just larger animals in general. Like, could you imagine what if that started happening to like cows, like cattle, you know, or deer, or like things that we don't like, I guess we do rely on, but things that we would just see happening and knowing that, like, okay, like, it's a matter of time before this hops over to a human.
Right. And yeah, it only takes that one instance, honestly. So
Yes. No, that's kind of terrifying to think. That's one that is very practical that I don't think the vast majority of people even remotely think about. Are fungal, they're not diseases, which I guess just fungal infections, I guess.
yeah, it'd be an infection.
Yeah, fungal infections that literally zombify you or cause you to kill yourself in various ways. And there's so many videos out there of that happening to other like insects. So if you're listening or watching and you haven't seen this before, I forget what it's called. You said the name earlier, right? Of what that fungal infection's called?
Oh, cordyceps.
Cordyceps. Look that up. It is wild. I see it a lot with like praying mantises. Like that happens to it quite frequently.
It gives me the shit, like the heebie-jeebies when I watch it, because I'm like, ugh, like that. Like it's a fungal that's just a fungus that's just taking over its host.
Yeah,
it's
only a matter of time. The other one that I think is only a matter of time, which it doesn't keep me awake at night, but I think, at least for this part one, because this is a two-part and we'll dive into 5 more after this one, but I think kind of as a finale to this top 5 or the top 10, nuclear war and or World War III. I'm kind of combining those together because the whole joke, who was it? Was it Albert Einstein? There was someone much wiser than I at one point. He said, I don't know how World War III will be fought, but World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones because World War III is going to be so catastrophic. And it's probably because of nuclear weapons, atomic weapons. Really, we're in the nuclear phase now, but at the time, I think atomic weapons was the name of the game. One thing I'll recommend to everybody listening or watching, if you haven't had a chance to read the book or watch any interviews by someone named Annie Jacobsen, look her up. She published a book not too long ago called Nuclear War, A Scenario. It's very interesting because what she does in this book, it's a nonfiction book. She went through this whole process of interviewing former Department of Defense officials, Secretary of Defenses, people in the Air Force, the Navy, like the top brass of those that make the decisions, or retired officials that make the decisions within the upper echelon of our military and state departments, as to what does it look like the day of a nuclear attack? Like what is the procession of things that happen the moment that we know it's happening, like that moment, right? It's really interesting. And I learned a lot of things from segments of that book, but then also through some of the interviews she's had on various podcasts. Basically, if nuclear war were to happen, now let's define nuclear war here for a second. The U.S. has a policy, and this is true, you can look this up and Google it. The U.S. has a policy. The moment we perceive a potential rogue launch of a nuclear missile head through a satellite radar, we launch our entire payload. It's a use it or lose it mentality. So within seconds of just that alert, that warning of like, hey, something's headed our way, which is like within seconds of launch, we have, and what's the term? I put it in my notes here. We use the term launch on warning. It's basically the same concept as use it or lose it. So the minute that launch happens, we launch our entire payload before we even absorb a single blast. Now, go ahead. I see you about to say something.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, and you actually might not know the answer to this. Every nuclear missile that we have, because I'm almost positive we have a silo in Texas, if not a couple. They're up in the Panhandle. I could be 100% wrong on that, but I'm pretty sure we have a couple that are in Texas. Now, are each of those missiles designated to go to a specific location?
I don't know that factually, but let's pretend I know, and I'll just fake it till I make it on this one. I don't believe so. I think through the software, they would have to tell it what to target. Now, I imagine there is a short list of targets to very quickly automatically choose. Now, I could be wrong. They may all be predestined for various places that, and maybe that rotates out. Like maybe it is predetermined, but there's like an audit process that changes. Honestly, I don't know. I could be totally talking out my butt right now. But yes, and also I never actually looked into that. I know most of our missile silos are across like the Midwest. I actually never thought about that if we have any in Texas or not. Like, feel free to fact check that in real time. The Panhandle would make sense. I know outside of Amarillo, that's where they house like a decommission service. And also, I think that's where we store like a lot of our helium as well. Like, there's a lot of things that could go boom around Amarillo, which is terrifying to think about because you would lose a good chunk of Texas at that point. But it makes sense. Not a lot of people live out there if things were to go boom.
So I think we have one, the Dias Air Force Base. It's Atlas F Missile Site S-8, approximately 3 miles east of Winters, 500 feet southwest of Highway 177, Winters, Runnels County, Texas. So it's not too far from Abilene.
Oh, that's not that far out there because Abilene's, I mean, that's just like west of Fort Worth by like what, 5 minutes or something?
It's about 2 hours.
Is it really 2 hours from Fort Worth?
I've driven to West Texas before.
Damn, I don't think I don't view Abilene as like West Texas, but I mean it's getting out there, I guess.
It's you don't really, you still have greenery, but like it's kind of like that halfway. But I could be wrong, but yeah. So stored on site. Significance: the threat posed by intercontinental ballistic missiles (ICBMs) lay at the heart of nearly all foreign policy decisions during the Cold War era. I don't understand a lot of this other stuff, but yeah, there is actually, I think there is actually one there.
It didn't surprise me, but it surprises me. The other thing I learned that was very interesting and kind of terrifying too is, so all of the missiles, the nuclear missiles we have stateside here, if we were to launch them, we launch them over the North Pole. So we shoot them north from our perspective, and they all fly over Russia. So let's just say she uses the North Korea example of like if North Korea were to launch something and then we launch something at North Korea, those missiles that we shoot at North Korea, they fly over Russia. So how, if I'm Russia, do I even trust that those missiles that are flying over my airspace aren't going to blow up in my airspace, you know? And this all happens so fast too. It's like you're not able to get Putin on the phone quick enough to say like, hey, bro, trust us. We swear this isn't going to hit you. But like, meanwhile, you're flying hundreds of missiles over their airspace.
Yeah. If I can be honest, though, it only takes one person to hit that button. And as soon as every single government authority that has missiles, because I know not every country has them. I could be 100% wrong.
You're correct. It's a very small number, but those that do have a lot.
Yeah. So it's like, and I can obviously look it up just to have it for numbers' sake, but I know Iran has them, China, Russia, I think England, United States,
India, quasi North Korea.
Yeah, and then I
think that's it.
I could be wrong. I don't know. But if one person hits that button, it's only going to take like, because I'm pretty sure, because you said it's a satellite-based thing. I'm pretty sure almost every country that has the missiles has satellites in space. So it's only going to take that amount of time to find out, like, oh, hey, someone launched a missile. We're not taking any chances. Where's the auto tracking going? And we'll just push the button and just launch them all. Now.
Yeah, so it's Russia has the most. We have the second most. Then it goes China, France, the United Kingdom, England, Pakistan, India, Israel, North Korea. And then you also have other countries that have nuclear weapons on behalf of other countries. So the following countries have nuclear weapons because they're on loan or being stored on behalf of the U.S. So Italy, Turkey, Belgium, Germany, and the Netherlands. And then you also have, hang on, I had to zoom in here and I got a little a little weird. And then Russia has some in Belarus.
How messed up would it be? So it's like you say, like, oh, they have these missiles on loan, so it's like they have the ability to launch these missiles. But what are they like? No, we're just storing those for a closer shot at our target if we need them. So it's like I
think that's 100% what it is. It really is like from a strategic perspective of the speed from launch.
Yeah,
because I think I'm assuming they're probably stored on U.S. military bases. Like they're not just being stored casually somewhere.
Yeah, but I think that nuclear warfare. I think if World War III is going to happen, it's going to involve some form of nuclear warfare. It's going to have to, because we, as you've already know, history repeats itself. And if you look at 1941, December 7th, 1941, with Japan and Pearl Harbor, and then Hiroshima and all that kind of stuff. It's hard for me to believe that we're going to fight this next war with guns, and with who we have in office currently, I wouldn't trust that man. But
here's the thing, though. Like, I guess this is what I'm trying to get back to is no one survives that.
No.
Nobody survives that. Like, you can look up simulations of like what happens, but like it's like it's game over at that point. And I think because international leadership is aware of that, nobody's willing to be the one to do it.
No. And here's all the billionaires that are buying bunkers, and
they wouldn't be able to escape. There's no escape.
There's no way, unless you actually know that, hey, like next week, Wednesday, the whatever day at 2 p.m., they're about to launch these missiles and you're already in your bunker. Even then, I don't think you would actually survive. I don't think you would. And even if you did survive that, what are you going to do? Because you don't have your...
The tail end of her book talks about the 100+ years after that. Like nuclear winter is going to be a very real thing, and there will be no agriculture. Like, you will immediately go back to hunter and gather.
Yeah, you're going to have to. Yeah, and we're going to be starting. But the thing is, if that was to happen, I don't think our planet, even after that, has enough resources to even remotely come close to what we've achieved over the last, 1,000 years, if not longer. Like, we wouldn't have enough resources on our planet to do so, because it took all those resources just to get to where we're at now, all for it to be gone at the push of a button.
Now, let me leave you with this one. Do you think we've already gone down this trajectory before? Like, rewind humanity, I don't know, 500,000 years ago. Do you think at some point we've actually gotten on this timeline before? Click the button, and this is like the second or third or fourth go-around of this exact same storyline? Not verbatim, but coming to this point where it's like, oh, someone's going to click the button, and then you start from square one again.
Do I think that that's happened before?
Yeah.
I'll be honest, I don't know. I mean, history's not going to teach us about that if that's the case, because they obviously haven't taught us about that. I mean, when you look back at just what's happened previously in our history with certain missiles being launched, I mean, it probably hasn't been on a nuclear scale, but it's definitely been on a smaller scale, but it's barely been enough to set anything back.
Yeah. Well, we went through our top 5 for this part. We have a second part that's coming up here very soon. So if you're watching this in the future, you might already have the ability to go watch the second part. If not, definitely tune in next week. We'll have part 2 ready for you. We're going to kick it off with a really wild one. I mean, Riley, do you want to give any bit of a snippet, just kind of previewing the next one? I mean, it has to do with the second part. I mean, it is kind of like what, the second coming?
It does. And it's a very much so controversial topic. A lot of this one definitely divides. Like, I think if there's one other thing besides politics that divides people, it's definitely this. So we're definitely gonna kick it off with that on the start of the next one. So,
but let us know if you made it to this part of the episode. Leave us a comment, a follow, a like, etc. But let us know which of these top 5 do you think is most likely, or if you have one that we didn't even talk about, let us know, because we might talk about it in a future episode. But until then, we got 5 more to talk about.